It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again, and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Dentico. Today with me is Doug Betts, a UK-based HR consultant and leadership trainer who is on a mission to make the world of work a better place by turning nervous line managers into great people leaders. I'm very pleased that he's here with me today. Good morning, Doug. How are you?
Morning, John. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I'm good, thanks.
Great. Glad you could make it. We'll start right in. I like to get to it. And so let me ask you this question. What was it that inspired you to become involved in the HR field?
For me, I was inspired by, I think, some of the bad experiences I had as an employee very early on in my career, where I worked in environments where there was no training, no support, and people like myself were failing because that wasn't there. And I thought this is something that could be made better very easily.
It was more of a personal experience for you to become involved. You got inspired by your own, the own issues that you found.
No, that's right. When I started my first job in insurance in my early 20s before HR, I was trained for 2 weeks on how to do what you call a normal job in that company. And I was told to forget all that. You're going into a different team and doing something completely different. And nobody ever explained to me about the process, what I was doing, why I was doing it, how it fitted into the grand scheme of things. And I thought, well, I know I'm failing, but I know I'm not stupid. I know I could actually do this if somebody had trained me and explained it to me properly. So I think that was really why I started to get interested in the world of work and people and the experience that people have when they're in the workplace. And as the years went on, I found myself getting interested in other aspects of HR as well that weren't just about the training and development side of things, like recruitment, employment law, but it kind of all came together for me. And I've made it my career for 23 years now.
Great. Yeah, I've always had this idea that it goes something like this. Just because I went through it doesn't mean you have to go through it. I want to make things better for people, and it's one of the reasons why I got into the HR training world. So let me ask you this, Doug. Let's go to the next question, and that is, how would you define leadership? And in your opinion, what is the purpose of leadership?
So for me, I think it's about enabling people to do their best work with your support as being that inspirational leader. I think as a leader, you're there for your team if they need the support and the technical advice, but you're also there to motivate, inspire them, and to enable them to feel that they can do their best work and they can problem solve and do a lot of that stuff by themselves. So if you're doing your job right, they shouldn't need you as much as time goes on because they're confident they're doing the right things and you're just there as a guide and a backup if it's needed.
Interesting. So let me ask you this as a follow-up to that. How do you, in your own mind, if you do, contrast the difference between leadership and management?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and those two terms are so often used very interchangeably. I think for me, the manager is more of an old-fashioned functional option in terms of a hierarchy where there's somebody who signs off your annual leave, approves things or not for you, and is supposed to look after your welfare. But I think for me, it's left over very much from the command and control kind of cultures that used to exist in a lot of organizations. Whereas I think the leader is more about the enabler, the facilitator, the inspirational person that other people look up to. Because there's plenty of people who are seen as inspirational leaders, even if they don't directly line manage anybody or line manage individuals. People will be inspired by them and want to follow them, work with them, know more about them. So for me, that's how I see the difference between the two things.
Do you think one person could be both a leader and a manager, or do you see them as two separate entities, if you will?
I don't think it's black and white as two separate entities. I think it is possible for people to sometimes switch between the two things. For example, I think sometimes as you can be the best leader in the world, inspirational, motivational, all of those things, but you still might have to do a functional aspect of your role.
That's interesting. I would agree. I think from my perspective, I see leadership more from a functional perspective,
Mm,
an output perspective. So, for example, for me, leadership is about making transforming change,
mm,
big change. And management is really about incremental change.
mm,
And I see them just as a note, I see them as the difference between effectiveness, the leader, and efficiency, the manager. But very interesting. I think a lot of people would owe to what you said.
mm.
Let me ask you this question. As you review the HR landscape in the UK, what issues or trends do you see emerging?
So for me, I see various things. At the moment, we're still in a bit of a debate about hybrid working and whether we want that or whether we don't. A lot of people do, but a lot of companies are still trying to get people back into the office 5 days a week, and I still think we need to strike a balance on that one. I think we have a high likelihood of a change of government in the next week or so. So again, there will be new legislation that the Labour Party are planning to bring in, which will affect employment law and how businesses operate. So again, it's up to me and people like me to take that, interpret it, and make sure it happens. I also see that there is still a big change around AI, which we're not quite prepared for yet, and I think we need to be. So this, for me, is about looking at its limitations, but also its possibilities, and redesigning our roles so in organisations so that we're future-proof, so that we can embrace the new technology and actually use humans to a better extent than just doing sort of some of the perhaps the low-level manual laborious stuff that they've historically had to do for themselves in a role. So, yeah, I think those are some of the key changes that we're facing at the moment that organisations need to be aware of.
You know, I had a previous guest, an MCC qualified coach from Canada by the name of Ed Temple. And he said something that just struck me. And that was that, and Ed's already got a coaching AI app
Mm,
that he calls Enzo. And so we got in, we started talking about that. And then he made the statement, he said, I think that AI will take 75% of the workload off of people. And of course, people here in the US are looking at the ramifications of that in terms of people losing jobs.
mm,
But he said what it's going to do is it's going to make that other 20%, that human part of the 20%, even more important.
mm.
Any reflections on that idea?
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right. I think it's really about redesigning the role. So for the human element, you redesign it, you push it, and you're upskilling your workforce so that they are trained to be that human element and to be what we need them to be in the future, rather than what they are now. And rather than people just thinking it won't affect their industry or sector, because it will in some way. And then the longer term effects of that is actually there might be more leisure time, there might be more free time because we don't all need to work 9 to 5 anymore. So there's a lot of sort of cultural implications and society implications coming from that as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I have a wonderful colleague. You may know him in the UK by the name of Michael Millward. And when Michael and I compared notes, we found very similar issues that are occurring in both the US and the UK as it pertains to attracting, hiring, and retaining top talent. Do you have any advice or good words for organizations that are now truly concerned with hiring and retaining top talent?
Yes, definitely. If I can sum it up in a nutshell, it's make sure you design your employee experience correctly. So this is everything that somebody experiences from the moment they apply for a job with you to the moment that they do eventually leave at the other end. So that entire cycle, because so many organizations get this wrong. They still think recruiting is just about looking through a bunch of CVs when they feel like it and picking the one they like the best. If you design an experience that's different, or that the reality is very different to what you're promised at the interview as a candidate, people are going to disengage quickly and they're going to walk away. And it's so important that you don't do that. So there's so many different elements that I think a business needs to get right here. So when they're designing the experience, it's about how do people feel as they go through each stage of it? Do they feel like just a number? Do they feel like they're part of a process, or do they feel like they're part of an organization and they're contributing to the greater good as to why it exists and what it sets out to do, and they know exactly what contribution that they're making to that purpose of the organization? So I think that's like a very high level view of it, but it's continuing that theme all the way through being an employee, because so many businesses will think about their customer journey, but they never think about their employee journey in the same way, from how it's marketed online and how it's sold to people. And they need to do that, because for some businesses, their customers and employers could be one and the same. And it's how you attract good people. And then to retain them, there's work I do around things like pay, benefits, to make sure they're competitive. But none of that counts for a second if you've got a bad culture in an organization. So again, it's making sure that that's led from the top downwards and people behave in the way that they're expected to, because I know so many good employees who leave their jobs because there's something that an organization does that doesn't sit right with them ethically. So it's important that, again, businesses get that right.
Yeah, the old adage that people don't leave organizations, they leave their managers. More times than not. I still think that's true. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in it as well. And I think sometimes it might not even be their immediate manager they're leaving. If they see the CEO or somebody on the senior leadership team doing something that's unethical, again, it will disillusion them. And even more so if they seem to be getting away with it because they've been there for 20 plus years, or because they're in a senior position. People do have a sense of right and wrong. And generally, that is what a big motivator that will drive them as to whether they stay in a business or not. Yeah, this is where it's so important to train managers and leaders to make sure that they're not inadvertently behaving in a bad way, and that they're aware that their behavior and how they act can influence and affect how people feel and have this effect.
Yeah, I agree. I think I want to go back to something you started to talk about earlier, because I talk about it all the time, and that is, it has to do with what I call messaging to prospective employees. What are we telling them? A few weeks ago, I was speaking at an event, and it was a group of nurse practitioners here in the US. And one of the women that was there, as I went through what I call the big three, and I'll mention them very quickly, and that is values alignment. Employees are looking for values alignment in an organization. Number two, you already mentioned, which is being involved in the decision-making processes of those organizations. And number three is training and learning that helps them develop their career. And it was interesting. She said to me, I've never asked that. I've never done that. We always ask, well, where'd you come from? And what jobs did you have? And the more she thought about it, she said, you're right. We don't even ask. We don't even go near those kinds of questions. And I think one of the problems that I see, for example, is the messaging is not going to the heart of the issue. And that is those three issues that I've mentioned. The big one, I think the big one is being involved in the decision-making processes of the organization. People want to matter, and they want their work to matter. And they want a level of control and autonomy over their own destinies. So I think that's really important. And for me, just to say, for me, it's shifting this notion of leadership to a much more open, collaborative process, if you will, where people are engaged in helping create an environment where they want to come and work every single day. Any thoughts on that from your side?
Couldn't agree more. From my side, it comes down to, what do people want to do at work? They want to problem solve, and they want the autonomy to be able to do it. There's nothing more frustrating than if you've got a solution to a problem that you know will work and you're blocked from actually implementing it. So I think as a leader, it's not about you telling people what they should be doing. It's about giving people the scope within reason to be able to come up with the solutions themselves and implement them. And then they can look back and say, here's how I improved this process, this experience at my last job, because I was allowed to do it and I could see it made the company money, it saved time, it was more efficient, whatever the reason was. And I think that's what will deep down give a lot of people job satisfaction. What won't give them satisfaction is if they have to run to their manager every 5 minutes and ask permission to do something.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation I had previously about empowerment. We hear that word all the time. It's become what I call a mega word. It's a mega word, empowerment. And if you look it up in the dictionary, what you find is another word, a synonym, is delegation. And the interesting part about delegation is we've been talking about delegation for over 50 years. And one of the problems with delegation has always been the knock against it. It's always been, and it goes right back to your point. We delegate the responsibility to do something, but we sometimes, maybe more times than not, don't delegate the authority to carry out the responsibility. And as you say, people are always running back, checking. Can I do this? Is it okay? Listen, we got this lined up. Should I do this? That kind of a thing, rather than saying, fix it, it's yours. Any reflection on that?
Yeah, I think you have to start from a position of trust as a leader. You trust your team until they give you a reason not to. So it's about giving that enablement from the start, not that you have to earn it after a series of months, because it's natural human behavior to be suspicious of a new person you don't know. And then you know them, like them, and trust them, and then you tell them a bit more about yourself, you give them more responsibility. So it's really about trying to flip that on its head, or at least putting the mechanisms in place early on so that you feel as a leader you can trust people from an early part of them joining your team.
I wanted to ask you this other question about burnout. Okay. I see burnout all the time. If you can't get your hands on the talent, you're loading up the talent you already have with a great deal more. And let me ask you this, how would you recommend people and organizations deal with the issue of burnout? And by any chance, do you have any remedies at hand that can help people mitigate the effects of burnout?
I think, again, it comes back to training managers to spot the early signs of it and to be aware of how they should be handling those kind of conversations and making the initial approaches to check that people are all right. I think the other thing to remember is obviously people are different. There are people who thrive under pressure, others less so. It's about having the right amount of pressure in a job, because I find not having enough to do in the day is more stressful than perhaps sometimes having too much to do. So it's making sure that the balance is right. I've yet to see a job that's been a perfectly 100% designed to be the right level of busy at all times. It's not going to happen. You will get natural peaks and troughs, but that's very different to the actual burnout. So I think it is spotting the signs, looking for changes in behavior, looking for things that are perhaps out of character, and showing that you care, and actually trying to get away from this culture of everyone has to be seen to be busy at all times, or everyone has to seem to be coping with high pressure. Again, it's okay to not be okay and to admit that. And if you have that kind of culture where people can admit that, then it's going to save a lot of stress cases and sickness later on. So it might be that you do have to readjust things, or you have to reprioritize tasks. But again, that's where a good leader can come in and help somebody do that if they're not sure. So yeah, I think it comes back greatly to having the right culture where people can be open about that kind of thing and admit that they're struggling and know that's okay. It's not that they're incompetent. It's just there's only so many hours in the day that somebody can do their job, and nobody's going to do their best work under a certain bad type of culture or environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was watching I was reading the other day an article on ambition. And sometimes it has it has a cloud hanging over it. This person's very ambitious. But the point that this one author was making is it can be a good thing. There are people who are very ambitious, who want to do more work and want to make a real go of it, if you will. And maybe we shouldn't try to push that down as much as we recognize that this person really wants to do more, and give that person the opportunity to rise up and do more. Any thoughts on that?
Definitely. That's something I relate to a lot, because in my corporate career, I was the ambitious one who always wanted to take on more, and I kept reaching ceilings. And I think some people saw me as a threat, which they really shouldn't have done, because I was never there to try and take over from a manager. I did want to get more responsibility. I wanted to prove to myself I could do things, and I think push myself outside of the comfort zone. So I completely understand it. So I think you manage people like me in a slightly different way. And again, it comes to the skill of a leader of being able to delegate certain tasks. At the same time, you don't want them to abuse it either, where you find you're doing a job 2 pay grades above you because you've just asked for more work and you're not getting the reward that goes with it, because there's that trap as well. But I think what you can definitely do, and when I had a team in my last job, I tried to do as well, is you do give them extra responsibility, you give them the development, you give them the coaching alongside it, so they do have that person they can ask for support if they need it. But you cultivate that correct culture. And yeah, you don't try and hold ambitious people back, because if you do, what's going to happen is they'll just get frustrated and run off to the competition or find a job somewhere else where they can progress. And I think from some of my experiences, people try to do that. They try to keep me a little bit too little too late by the time I'd already found another role and had moved on, rather than actually trying to develop me and put me through a kind of a program. So yeah, obviously now I'm self-employed and came out of that world altogether, but from my time being an employee, it's definitely something I can relate to.
I understand. One of the things I've had previous conversations about this, and I'm leaning more and more on this in terms of burnout. Just to return to that subject just for a minute, and that is the use of or the hiring, if you will, of coaches before anything really happens, before you get to a point where people are starting to burn out. And I think it's a worthwhile idea in terms of, look, we've got some coaches here. If you feel like you're burning out, you feel like you've reached the end, if you will, of what you're able to do, maybe we can get a coach in here to help you navigate through this issue or this problem right now. How do you feel about that?
I think it's a great idea, but I think the key thing is it's finding the right coach and the right specialism that the person needs help with. It could be a technical specialism in the job. It could be just about time management, money management. It could be about personal issues outside of work. So I think it's about finding the right coach and the right support. So here in the UK, we do have mental health first aiders in a lot of workplaces now, which for the mental health aspect of it, there'll be like a signposter to listen to an initial problem and to point somebody in the right direction. When it comes to work more specifically, we have a lot of mentoring and buddy systems with companies where you have somebody who will come in and support. But I think having the right coach who's the right match for you is, I think, perhaps the most important thing there, and somebody who will get you and will help you with the objectives. And also, when you have those kind of coaching conversations, it's so important that you actually have an end goal in mind. Otherwise, it just turns into a very friendly chat that doesn't really go anywhere. So you need the skilled coaches who can actually have the right conversations and ask the right questions, rather than just assigning somebody who's been in the team a long time, who's experienced in their role, to take this on as a bit of an extra, because they might not necessarily be the best person to help out.
Point taken. Point well taken. I think but then again, if I come back the other way, there may be, as one coach that I had on the podcast said, sometimes people just need to vent. They just need to, in a sense, as we say, get it off their chest. And there may not be an end note here or an end game per se. It's just that a person needs to just really talk and get it off their chest. I think that can be a very valuable use of a coach, at least from the point of view of understanding, as you aptly pointed out, what's the real issue here? Is it a work issue? Or is it a home issue? Is it a domestic issue at home? Because sometimes that alone will overwhelm you. As I like to say, you've just gotten a call at 3:00 in the morning and the police have called you and said, come down here and pick up your drunken child. In a sense, that alone could provide a rather significant impetus to burnout. So I think it's important to look at those things individually and figure out where the real problem is.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's very true. And I think the mistake I see a lot of managers make in the UK is they will hide behind a formal procedure to try and sort the problem out, rather than just having a simple, open, honest conversation with somebody. And I think actually if somebody starts behaving out of character, you don't put them through a capability or disciplinary process. You actually talk to them and find out what's going on and try and help them.
Yeah, so human. We've talked about AI before, and I'm now working on a certificate in the AI ethics. I'm trying to get that finished in the next couple of months. Some interesting questions have come up. And one of the things that just occurred to me was, how many people in the UK and the US make a call to an organization or to a business, and they get an automated response? Press 1, press 2, press 3 for this. If you know the extension number, dial it in. And I wonder how many of them would relish the opportunity of having a human on the other side of the telephone when they're calling in. So I'm keeping a very, let's put it this way, watchful eye on the development of where AI goes.
Mm.
And there are certain things that are human and innately human and will never be replaced. And that's a good thing.
Yes, definitely.
Go ahead.
No, that was it. I was just thinking about the automation of things, and when you ring up a large company, you sometimes go around in circles because they haven't thought about their process, and you end up back where you started, even if you're following their instructions and pressing the right button. So I think, yeah, it proves the point that there is not the artificial intelligence is not fully where it needs to be yet. And I think, yes, the ability to talk to a person who can understand something, it still goes a long way, and I think there'll always be a need for that.
Doug, you may be too young to remember, but I remember in the advent of the computers in the late 70s and 80s, people said in those days, we'll never have a need for paper ever again. That has not come to pass, oddly enough. But let me ask you my final question, and my favorite little final question, and that is simply this. If you had a magic wand and wanted to apply that magic wand to an issue or problem in the HR world in the UK, what is that problem in your perspective, and why did you choose that?
So my problem would be I wouldn't allow anybody to take up a people leadership position without being properly trained first, because so many people get promoted into it over here in the UK because they've been with the company a long period of time or they're technical experts, but they're suddenly expected to have all these extra skills about how to lead and inspire people. And some of them might not be very good at that or be having imposter syndrome about it because no one's ever told them what the right thing to do is. And I think if you could get that training and development and coaching in there first, which is what I'm striving to do now, I think it will save a lot of issues further down the line around recruitment, retention, turnover, sickness, grievances, disciplinaries. So for me, that would be the one magic problem I would love to fix.
That's a great choice. That's a very great choice. I think that to give people, again, give people the training, give them the why of things. I like to think we're a why-driven species, WHY. We like to know why we're doing something and why it matters. So that's a great choice. Doug, I can't thank you enough for being with me here today on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I wish you all the success in the future and fair winds and following seas, as they say in nautical terms.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a good conversation.